Imagine waking up one morning thinking everything is fine, only to realize that decades of tiny, invisible financial decisions quietly shaped your life. And not in a good way. You trusted the rules. You followed advice. You were careful. But careful doesn't always mean safe. If you saw my first story, you know how easily mistakes can stack up after 60. But even then, what I'm about to show you, it's something almost nobody notices until it's too late. Today, we're diving into the moment those small choices start to add up. The decisions you thought were safe. The forms you signed without a second thought. The "I'll deal with it later" moments that quietly cost you thousands over the years. By the end of this video, you'll see the kind of decision that shapes retirement more than anything else. And you'll have to ask yourself, if you could go back 10 years, is there a financial decision you would question today? That morning, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me, coffee gone cold, staring at statements and forms I'd signed years ago. Everything looked normal at first glance. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was off. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashing warnings, just a quiet, creeping sense that something important had been missed. Something tiny, almost invisible, that had quietly shaped my financial life for decades. I leaned back in my chair, ran my fingers through my hair, and whispered to myself, how did I not see this coming? It was the kind of realization that hits slowly, but lingers, haunting every small choice you've ever made. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The sunlight was cutting through the blinds, hitting the pile of papers on the kitchen table, the retirement statements, benefit forms, and bills stacked in a way I hadn't really looked at for years. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting it go cold while I stared at the numbers, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I told myself I had been careful. I had followed the rules. I was responsible. That's what I had always thought. But that day, something in me knew that wasn't enough. I reached for the first letter, a benefit statement I had signed when I turned 62. I remembered the thought I had back then. I'll take my benefits now. I can always adjust later. It sounded reasonable at the time. Everyone I knew seemed to be doing the same. It felt safe. But staring at it now, years later, I realized I hadn't understood the consequences. I hadn't realized how permanent some decisions could be, how quietly they compound over time, stacking month after month, year after year, until you don't even notice the weight they carry. I pulled out an old notebook and started writing down everything, the decisions, the letters, the forms, the advice I had blindly trusted. Every small detail that I had assumed was harmless. I started calculating the numbers slowly, painfully, because I knew that ignoring them hadn't made them go away. That $250 monthly maintenance fee on a standard investment account, that small, almost invisible deduction had quietly taken over $3,000 a year from me. That $120 insurance adjustment I barely questioned, that added up to more than $5,000 over 10 years. And the early benefits? By taking them 2 years sooner than I could have, I realized I had left almost $40,000 on the table, money that could have made a huge difference in my later years. The weight of it hit me all at once. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't just about the money. It was about freedom, options, the ability to make changes without stress or fear. I remembered a friend who had retired around the same time as me, proudly telling me he was playing it safe, by following every standard recommendation, never questioning anything. And yet, a few years later, he told me in a quiet voice over lunch, "I wish I had paid closer attention to the small stuff, the tiny fees, the timing. I never realized how much it all added up." I felt a wave of anger, not just at myself, but at the system that makes these mistakes so invisible, at the people who give advice without context, at the quiet, unnoticed rules that seem safe but quietly control your financial life. And at the same time, there was shame. Shame that I had trusted too easily. Shame that I hadn't asked the hard questions. Questions like, what happens in 5 years, 10 years, if I live to 90? I flipped through the old statements, tracing the numbers over the years. Small things, things I thought didn't matter, had quietly shifted my entire plan. Not checking a box, not calling to clarify a form, assuming the standard option was safe, it had all added up. Thousands here, tens of thousands there, all invisible until you finally look close enough to see the pattern. And then I realized something worse. Almost everyone around me, friends, neighbors, family members, were making the same mistakes. They didn't know it either. They trusted the system, trusted the advice, assumed careful choices were safe, and slowly, quietly, their financial freedom was slipping away, just like mine. I put down the papers, took a deep breath, and asked myself, how many small choices have I made that quietly shaped my life? How many could have gone differently if I had only questioned them? I remember sitting there one afternoon, staring at another pile of statements I had set aside for months, thinking I would deal with it later. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees outside my kitchen window, and I realized I had spent almost 3 hours just staring at numbers and papers, pretending they didn't matter. $120 here, $300 there. It didn't seem like much at the time, but when I added it all up over 10 years, it was more than $50,000 quietly slipping through my fingers. And it wasn't because I had done anything reckless. I had followed every safe piece of advice I could find. I had trusted the standard options everyone told me were fine. I remember my neighbor Jim telling me once, "Don't worry about the small stuff. It all evens out." At the time, I laughed, thinking he was paranoid. But sitting there that afternoon, I realized it didn't even come close to evening out. Those small fees, the forms I had signed without really thinking, the letters I had glanced at and tossed aside, they had quietly stacked up month after month, year after year. By the time I noticed, the damage was done. And that's the part that hits hardest. You don't feel it in real time. You don't see it. And then one day you do, and it's already too late to rewind. I pulled out my calculator and started going line by line. I saw that the $250 annual fee on a safe account had quietly added up to $20,500 over 10 years. My decision to take a small pension adjustment earlier had cost me almost $15,000 I could have used for health care or even a small trip with my wife. Even waiting just a few weeks to ask a question about a form could have saved me hundreds. Hundreds here, hundreds there. It all added up. And I kept asking myself, why didn't anyone tell me this? The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the feeling of being powerless, like my options were shrinking silently, almost invisibly. I remember sitting back in my chair and staring at the ceiling. I had always been careful with money, saved more than most of my friends, followed the rules, believed the advice. And yet, sitting there, I felt like I had been walking blindfolded through a minefield I didn't even know existed. And it wasn't just me. I started thinking about my friends who retired around the same time. Some were careful, some not so much, but the pattern was the same. A quiet erosion of security, tiny decisions accumulating without anyone really noticing. The mistakes weren't dramatic. There was no big crash moment. No one's account suddenly went to zero. It was far more insidious. $200 here, $400 there, a small change in the timing of benefits, trusting advice that had worked 20 years ago, it all added up. I remembered one morning when my daughter called excited, asking if we could help her with a small down payment for her new apartment. I told her we could, but I felt a pang of guilt. The money was there, technically, but it was tight. I realized that all those tiny losses, the ones I hadn't even thought about, were starting to affect real-life choices. It wasn't just abstract numbers anymore. It was affecting the people I loved, the things I wanted to do, the peace of mind I had promised myself when I retired. I started asking questions I had avoided for years. What happens if the market dips again? What if inflation goes up 5% per year for the next decade? What if unexpected medical costs hit us? These weren't just hypothetical scenarios. They were realities that could quietly destroy years of planning if I didn't pay attention. And yet, most people I knew never asked these questions. They assumed the rules were neutral. They weren't. By the time evening rolled in, I had a long list of missed opportunities and quiet mistakes. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, all decisions I had made thinking they were minor, inconsequential, safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been living in a slow-motion trap where every day added weight to choices I didn't fully understand. And the strangest part was how invisible it all felt until that moment. I had been blind, trusting the process, trusting that if something mattered, someone would have warned me. No one did. And I started thinking, how many of these quiet mistakes had I made in other areas of my life? How many times had I assumed later was safe, only to realize later had arrived too late? Every small form I hadn't read, every minor adjustment I had ignored, every delayed question, it all added up in ways I never imagined. And sitting there, staring at the numbers and letters spread across the kitchen table, I felt a mix of anger, shame, and determination. Anger that the system didn't make these things obvious. Shame that I hadn't questioned more. Determination because I still had time to do something about it, but only if I acted differently from now on. I started jotting down notes, making calculations, comparing scenarios, asking questions I had never dared to ask before. I realized that even a few small adjustments could make a big difference over the coming years. It wasn't too late, but I couldn't wait any longer. And that's when I asked myself a question I want you to think about too. Have you ever signed a form, made a financial choice, or trusted advice without really understanding it, and only realized years later what it cost you? Because that's exactly what had happened to me. Quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. And it hit harder than anything I could have imagined. I poured myself another cup of coffee, letting it go cold again as I picked up the next stack of papers. Statements from accounts I hadn't touched in months. Letters from financial institutions I had set aside, assuming nothing important here. But now, staring at the numbers, I realized how wrong I had been. Every month, a few $100s of fees here, a small penalty there, minor adjustments to benefits. Each one by itself seemed harmless, almost laughable. But over decades, it was a quiet avalanche. Over 10 years, it had cost me more than $60,000 I could have used for trips, small investments, or even just a little peace of mind. I remember thinking back to the day I first started collecting my pension. I thought I was being smart, taking it early so I could adjust later. $200 a month seemed reasonable, and I told myself I could make up for any shortfall later. But that small decision, a choice I thought was reversible, ended up costing me more than $18,000 over the next decade. Every month, I saw the gap grow, quietly, almost invisibly, until it became impossible to ignore. And it wasn't just the money. It was the weight of choices I hadn't even realized I was making. I remembered a conversation with my old friend Barbara, who had retired a few years earlier. She told me, "Don't worry about the small stuff. It all works out." At the time, I laughed. But now I understood what she didn't. The small stuff doesn't just add up. It compounds. Those tiny decisions we ignore, thinking they're trivial, quietly shape our future in ways we don't see until the damage is done. I thought about my own household. My wife and I had always been careful, saving more than most, following every piece of advice we could find. Yet here I was, staring at numbers, realizing that following the rules wasn't enough. The system didn't make it easy. It assumed you were paying attention, questioning, double-checking, but most of us weren't. We assumed safety, assumed someone else was watching out for us, and that assumption had cost us tens of thousands of dollars. I started writing everything down, every small fee, every missed opportunity, every minor adjustment that seemed safe at the time. $200 here, $450 there, an unexpected increase in insurance premiums, a minor delay in filing some forms. It all added up. I even started calculating compound interest lost over the years because of delayed decisions. It was staggering. Over 20 years, some of these small choices had cost more than $100,000. And the worst part? No one saw it coming. I remember a Friday afternoon when I realized just how much these quiet mistakes affected real life. My daughter called, asking if we could help with a $5,000 deposit on her new home. I paused, calculating what was available, what had been quietly lost over the years. I realized that all those minor choices, decisions I didn't even think twice about, were now affecting the people I loved. And I felt a pang of guilt I hadn't anticipated. It hit me that retirement wasn't about having enough money on paper. It was about control. Control over my life, my time, my choices. And the loss of that control didn't happen overnight. It happened in tiny increments, unnoticed, until one day you wake up and see the consequences. I thought back to my own assumptions. I had always believed that being careful, following the standard advice, and trusting the system would be enough. But it wasn't. Being careful didn't prevent quiet losses. Not asking the right questions, not double-checking forms, not considering long-term consequences. It all added up. And now I could see it clearly. I started setting up small experiments, calculating different withdrawal strategies, comparing fees on old accounts, rereading every statement, checking every small detail I had ignored for years, and with every calculation, every note, I felt a little more in control. I could still fix some things, mitigate others, but the lesson was clear. Ignoring small choices doesn't make them harmless. It makes them expensive. And that's when I paused and asked myself the question I want you to think about too. If you could go back 10 years, is there a financial decision you would question today? I wanted to scream it aloud because the answer for me was painfully obvious. I had made dozens of decisions that seemed minor at the time, and now I could see exactly how costly they had been. I looked around my kitchen at the cold coffee, the piles of paper, and the clock ticking away, and I realized that time itself was slipping quietly, just like my money had. Each day counted. Each decision mattered. And yet, most people I knew still went about their lives thinking these tiny choices didn't matter, assuming the system had their back. It didn't. Not completely. Not if you weren't paying attention. I started asking myself deeper questions. How many forms have I signed without really reading? How many standard options have I blindly chosen? How many small opportunities have I missed, thinking I could deal with them later? The answers were overwhelming, and that feeling, that quiet, sinking realization, stayed with me for days. I remember calling my old friend George, asking if he had ever felt this way. "I thought I was careful," he said, "but after 10 years, I realized I had lost tens of thousands without even knowing it." We laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that hides fear and regret. And I knew he was right. We weren't careless. We were careful, but careful wasn't enough. By the end of that week, I had created a full spreadsheet. Every account, every fee, every small decision, $120 here, $400 there, adjustments to my pension, missed opportunities for small side investments. Each number was a reminder that the quiet erosion of security had been happening all along, and it was real. And that's when I realized something important. Retirement mistakes aren't dramatic. They're invisible. They don't hit you all at once. They creep up in the background, slowly reshaping your life, silently deciding how far your money will go, what choices you'll have, and how much freedom you'll actually feel. I stared at the list one last time that Friday evening, thinking about all the moments I had ignored, all the forms I had skimmed, all the advice I had trusted without questioning. I felt a mix of anger, shame, and determination. Anger at the system, shame at myself, determination to make sure that going forward I would not ignore another small decision. Every month, every form, every minor adjustment, it mattered more than I had ever realized. And I thought about you, watching this video, perhaps thinking you've been careful. Maybe you've followed the rules, trusted the advice, done everything right. But I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself, could a few small, quiet decisions already be shaping your financial future without you even realizing it? I sat in my kitchen, staring at the spreadsheet I had been building for weeks. And finally, for the first time in years, I could see it all clearly. Every small decision, every form I had signed without reading, every standard option I had assumed was safe. It all led to one single realization. I could have done things differently. I could have questioned, double-checked, paused before choosing. And if I had, maybe tens of thousands of dollars or even more could have stayed in my control. I remembered the very first financial choice I questioned after realizing the damage, my pension start date. $100, $200 a month seemed small at the time, but every month it compounded into a loss I hadn't accounted for. The numbers were staggering. Over 10 years, that early choice alone cost me nearly $18,000. And when I looked deeper, every overlooked form, every delayed decision, every minor, "it's fine, I'll do it later" moment, quietly added up. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about luck or being careless. This was about awareness. It was about knowing exactly what each decision meant in the long run. If I had asked the right questions, if I had paused even once, the results would have been different. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, I could have reclaimed control over my life and money. I thought back 10 years. Could I go back? Would I change the way I handled small decisions? Absolutely. I would question every form, every choice labeled standard or default. Every moment I assumed someone else was watching out for me. And that realization, painful as it was, finally gave me clarity. I picked up the pen and started recalculating, adjusting my strategy for the next years. For the first time in a long time, I felt empowered instead of anxious. And I asked myself the question I want you to consider right now. If you could go back 10 years, is there a financial decision you would question today? I don't ask this lightly. This is the single question that can change everything about how you approach your money, your choices, and your freedom after 60. Because small, quiet decisions accumulate faster than you think. And the earlier you start questioning, the more control you have over the outcome. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the afternoon sun. The world went on outside, unaware of the quiet financial battles we fight in our own homes. And I realized something crucial. It's never too late to start asking questions. Even if years of quiet mistakes have already added up, recognizing them now gives you the power to limit the damage and take control, moving forward. So here's the last thought I want to leave you with today. Take a moment, review your choices, and ask yourself honestly, have I made any small, quiet decisions that could be shaping my future without me realizing it? Write them down, calculate them, question them, and most importantly, don't wait another day to start taking action on what you can still control. Because the truth is this, retirement isn't just about having money in your account. It's about having freedom, options, and peace of mind. And every small choice, every little overlooked decision matters more than we often realize. I opened another envelope, one I had been avoiding for weeks. It was a notice about minor adjustments to my retirement account. Small amounts, just a few $100s here and there. But now, after tracking every decision, I could see the long-term impact. Over 15 years, these minor adjustments had quietly cost me more than $25,000. And the worst part, I had never noticed until I sat down and truly looked. I thought about how easily this could happen to anyone. Most people believe that being careful, following advice, and signing the standard forms is enough. They think mistakes are dramatic. They picture losing everything overnight. But the truth is far quieter, far more insidious. The losses sneak in like a slow leak in a boat, almost invisible, until suddenly you realize you're drifting far from where you thought you'd be. Then it hit me. The answer to the question I had been avoiding, if I could go back 10 years, would I question any financial decisions? The answer was a resounding yes. Not just one decision, but dozens. Starting my pension earlier than I should have. Skipping small questions about fees. Ignoring the fine print on accounts. Assuming defaults were safe. Each one alone seemed harmless, but together they quietly shaped my financial future, and I had the power to have done it differently. I remembered the mornings I sat alone at the kitchen table, coffee cold, staring at statements and wondering how I had missed so much. I felt regret, yes, but also a strange clarity. I understood that it wasn't about blame, It was about awareness, and awareness gave me a choice to act, to adjust, and to take control of what was still mine. I began recalculating everything, adjusting strategies, moving small amounts where they made a difference, asking questions I had been too timid to ask for years. Every choice felt heavier, but also more meaningful. And with each small correction, I felt that quiet relief of reclaiming control. Here's the truth I want you to take away. Retirement mistakes aren't dramatic. They aren't big moments. They are invisible, accumulating quietly until they become obvious. But once you notice them, once you track them, you gain the power to act. You gain the power to limit losses, even if you can't undo the past entirely. And now, as promised, here's the answer to the question I opened this series with. The decisions I would question 10 years ago are all the small ones I didn't notice, didn't question, didn't pause for. They were minor fees, standard forms, delayed filings, automatic withdrawals I didn't check. Each seemed trivial, but together they shaped everything. And knowing that now, I act differently. Every choice counts. Every question matters. Every month matters. So I want to leave you with this. Your turn to reflect. Have you made any small financial decisions that quietly shape your future? Could one tiny adjustment today prevent regret tomorrow? Think about it. Write it down. Talk about it. Because the quiet choices often matter more than the dramatic ones. And the power to shape your financial life is in the questions you ask. Today, not later.